Engagers, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration to help us in the process of using games and gamification in our daily lives, for example, to learn what we are teaching. And I am Rob Alvarez. I work at Ironhack, teach at IE Business School University, and so much more, and host this podcast. If you have an extra second, please go ahead and subscribe for free to our email list at professorgame.com/subscribe. And Engagers, welcome back to another episode of the Professor Game podcast. And we have Alexander with us today. But Alexander, before we take off, are you prepared to engage?
Absolutely.
Alexander Vilinskyy? Is that okay?
Yes.
Alexander Vilinskyy is right now the co-founder at commitclub.co. You might remember we had another interview with another of the co-founders of the Commit Club a few weeks ago. But he's also the head of design at Decipad. He's running Super Clear Design Studio in London. And he's an ex-designer at Spark, Grammarly, Documents in iOS, and other productivity startups. So plenty of stuff going on in the present, in the past, and hopefully as well in the future. Alexander, is there anything we're missing from that intro?
Not so much, yeah. I think I'm missing something. I think I might forgot to include something. But yeah, I'm writing like 6 or 7 projects at once. I'm more productive this way.
So designer life, totally.
Yeah, absolutely.
There you go. And Alexander, I don't think I've mentioned this before, but I have 4 names. And the third one is Alexander. So I'm Rob, Mariano, Alexander, Manuel. So I have 4 names.
That's a set. Yeah, this is nice. I love it.
There you go. So Alexander, you mentioned that you're running like 6 projects at a time. So what does a typical day or maybe a week look like for you? What does it feel like to be Alexander nowadays?
So I'm trying to balance my busyness as much as possible. So I have a couple of techniques. The first one is I have call-free Friday, which never happens, but I planned it. And I kind of have just less calls than all other days. But mainly running so many projects usually involves running a lot of calls, a lot of meetings, a lot of personal connections. And most of my day is actually happening in Google Meet or Zoom or Discord or whenever the work is happening. Beside that, I'm trying to practice a lot of craft, a lot of design craft. So even though I manage a lot of people, I still try to design, to take photos, to illustrate something every week, just to not to lose the sense of the craft. And I try to invest it as much as possible. I also have very naive idea about creator economy. I feel like I should invest into it so much time. So I spend all my free time in Twitter, sometimes in bed, sometimes at night, sometimes in the morning, basically all the time. And trying to balance all of this stuff. Plus I have family, plus I have some donations to run for Ukraine, plus I have some hobbies. Health is definitely the lowest priority right now, which is bad. But I'm working on that. I kind of bought some stuff to motivate myself to pay attention to health more.
Makes sense. And if that's becoming a priority, well, you have to give it that sense of priority for sure. So Alexander, we always like to start with, with the sort of the formal questions. We'd like to start with what we like to call first attempt in learning or fail, right? One of those moments when, things didn't go your way. You were expecting things to go one way and they didn't. We want to be there with you, learn, what do you do when those moments come? And of course, see how you got out of that moment as, of course, in your designer mindset.
This is interesting because I never remember me succeeding in anything. So basically, I feel like I failed my whole life, but in a good way. I just felt like this is the life how it is. I can embrace it. I feel like during my school years, I was a failure like 24 hours. I wasn't good at school. I wasn't good at anything, at math. I was learning so many things. I was good at math, kind of. I was good at learning foreign languages, kind of. I was kind of good at sports, kind of, but I was never kind of good enough to be the top. I was always like the 10th best, out of 20, always in the middle. So this sounded like a failure to me and to my parents back that time. But right now I kind of enjoy the middle. But I'm able to really focus on something that is important to me. Let's get to more details, success and failure. So I think I failed a lot as a designer because it's one of the biggest kind of it's a very vulnerable profession if you think about it. If you write a code, for example, for a program, it will either work or not. So you will always have this binary thinking of, yeah, it works, maybe with some kind of price sacrifices, but it works, right? It's 100% can be deployed to production. In design, there is no such metric. Basically, you are navigating between the tastes of millions of people if you're building products for millions of people, and plus the founder's vision, the company vision, your own taste, the industry standards, and so on and so on. With the design, no one can actually come and tell you, oh, this is a good design, or no, this is bad design, because it's very, very subjective. So basically, every design is a failure until you convince someone that it's not a failure and you actually did a good job. And if you could imagine, no junior designer can do that. No middle designer can really persuade kind of founders and everyone in the management that they're good designers. So it took me like maybe 8 years to become really comfortable at presenting something visionary, something brave, and persuading founders that, hey, you have to be brave in your designs, in your product, and that's the way to become better. I specifically was given feedback that I'm a bad designer maybe like 20 times in my life. Like people were saying that I'm not a good thinker, I'm not a good strategist, I'm not a good visual designer. And it was in different points of my life. And I was always kind of feeling very motivated to prove them wrong. So every time that I've received this feedback, which was really kind of in Ukrainian culture, it's very direct. I will go and read right now. I will kind of teach you the basics of visual design for the past 3 centuries and kind of discover the secret of visual design, and then we'll bring it to work. And that's actually happened with all of my failures. So I'm pretty confident saying that I really raised a very resilient person right now inside myself. That anytime I face some kind of challenge, I always do really profound research and then get back with the result that almost no one in the industry can repeat.
Amazing. And is there perhaps a time that you remember, one of those times it was, I don't know, particularly painful or particularly interesting to learn that allowed you to get to new heights? Can you sort of take us to one of those moments? Because we want to, experiential learning is more about experiencing it. So the closest thing we can be there is with that story with you.
I think visual design was like one of the most painful moments. I was like 6 years in design by that time. And I was designing one of the apps for productivity. And my manager specifically said like, hey, Sasha, like this is my alternative name, Alexander. Hey, Alexander, you are a very good thinker, but whenever you do design, they don't really share your way of thinking. They just look a bit ugly and not on the level that we expect from you. This was very painful because I was trying really hard. I would understand this feedback if I weren't trying, but I was trying really hard and I was still kind of failing. So it was particularly painful to hear, and I was really devastated for maybe first week. But after that, I usually love to have the strategic evenings sometimes when, for example, my wife goes somewhere and I'm just sitting down with the notebook and I'm trying to assess how my life can go in different scenarios in the future, in the next year. And I figured out that if I would fix one thing about myself right now, and it would be visual design, it would open a new heights for me. It would allow me to be more confident. It would allow me to prosper on this job and also on other jobs as well. So I really kind of made a plan for myself. I reached out to some people that I trust and I believe their design was good. I asked them to go for a coffee with me. I asked them to, I kind of make a fake friendship with them so they would critique my designs more honestly, not like strangers. Really, ironically, we became real friends then. So it was just, I was faking so good that we became real friends. And I just started studying everything that is related to visual design. So not visual design itself, but everything that around it, like how to make photographs, how to make 3D illustrations, how to make nice interface, how to type letters, how to make your own font, how to make illustration in this particular style. How to, I maybe signed up for $3,000 worth of educational courses. For me, it was a big money. It was like 2 salaries back in time just to learn one skill, that was so essential for me. And, after kind of maybe 6 months or a year, I really felt more confident. And then I received that really sweet feedback from my manager, who said like, oh, wow, you really became like one of the best in the game. I'm really kind of surprised that you're right now producing. So it was a big win that I'm still kind of very proud of myself. I usually remind myself whenever I feel down, I feel like, oh yeah, if I can ace such a subjective thing as visual design, then I can pull it off like anything.
Amazing. I love that story because it has both, the difficult moment and then, what you did about it. It's not just like you went and you went weeping and saying, oh, I'm so terrible. What do I do now? I'm not a good designer. Oh, nothing I can do, right? You went and you took control of the situation. You said, what are the things that what's the actions that I can actually take to get myself to be better? And you can, especially with, one of the things that took me a lot of time to understand is that design, it's a practice and it's something that you have to do and you have to do it and do it over again, right?
Absolutely. There is no shortcuts here, unfortunately. You cannot, like, for example, read 50 books on design and become a good designer. It's only after 50 projects you will be a better designer.
You don't read your way into design.
Absolutely. No way.
I love it. So absolutely. I loved how you went through that and also sort of acknowledging the fact that, it's fine. It's one of the things that you were not perfect at, you're not ideal at. You could get better. And you did. You decided that was an area that was going to help you improve in whatever your development was going to be. And you went for it. You took over and you practice. And this is exactly what I like to say to many of my students and people who come to my workshops on gamification. It's, kind of seems overwhelming at the start in many ways, but then you get to do it once, it probably is going to fail. You get some feedback, you do it better, you do these improvements. It starts getting better and better. And the next time you do it, it's going to be a little bit easier and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah.
That is basically the way. And talking about, times that actually went well, because I know you've been involved in many successful projects as well. Can you give us a story about one of those, like how it went well, or perhaps how did you pivot? How did you get better? How did you change things to see how that went and perhaps have some of those success factors?
I think my main area in like what I see the success in every project that I'm starting with, and it's kind of my like superpower, is working on onboarding. So basically teaching people how to use product or how to inspire people to connect the product with their lives. So I think this is very relatable to games because it uses mostly all of the same kind of mechanics as all games are. So you usually kind of want to inspire people to some extent. You want to teach them the way, you want to give them some guidance, some challenge in sort of way. So let's take productivity app, for example, like Grammarly or Documents. They're good examples. So imagine you want to, like, you are building this app for document storage, right? If you would open the app just right in the folder, people will probably get the concept, some percentage of them, but they would not necessarily understand what to do next or what kind of actions they have to do next to take the maximum out of it. And if people are not taking the maximum kind of potential of the app, they will not pay for it. But we're interested in people paying us, right? So our job is to persuade them that they need to fully kind of integrate the app into their lives. So next time they will see this prompt to upgrade to premium or whatever, they will actually pay it because they will feel, oh yes, this app does so much to my life. I really want to pay it. It's a bit different from games because games you're usually buying beforehand and then you're playing and then you might be satisfied with the game or not. But usually in freemium subscription models in the apps, you download the free app, you use it for some time. Then once you fell in love or you feel like there is a limitation, you pay extra to unlock new features or to continue using it, right? So we have this span of time, like probably first minutes or first days, when we really have to persuade the usefulness of the app. So what we usually do, for example, for the documents, it was quite a good case. We were trying to understand more from people. So basically personalize the experience to them. So we were asking, okay, what kind of documents are you usually opening? Is it PDFs or is it music videos or is it videos or anything? And we will then tailor the whole experience of the app to this particular person. So we would know that, oh, hey, there is a person that actually kind of uses documents to study in the university. So we know their motivation. Their motivation is to annotate stuff, to become better student, to present stuff without mistakes to their professors, to excel in the university, get good grades, and so on. So all of our communication then based on these human life outcomes. So get better grades with documents, right? It's a better way to promote stuff rather than say, okay, you can annotate now. So it really taught me, to think about the human behaviors behind it. Or there was one case when I was making interviews with users. This is one of my regular practices, to talk with someone who is paying us or someone who's using our product. And I just discovered that documents was used, for example, as a board journals for boating. For people like captains on boats are using documents as their kind of offline mode for manuals for the boat and stuff. Or as far as I know, some examples of documents are used in the aerospace industry as well. So people rely on some cases there, and our job is to really persuade them that we can do the job for them, so they would take a better decision when they would buy it. In terms of wins, I'm sorry for getting a bit too abstract, but if we're speaking about like really detailed kind of techniques. So one of my favorite techniques is called Gestalt checkboxes. So what it means is that you just design 5 checkboxes, and already the first one is pre-filled, is already checked. For example, download this app. And after it, you have 4 checkboxes with the stuff that you need user to do. For example, upload 1 document, invite 1 friend, subscribe to our news. The magic about this technique is that people really their minds always want to check boxes in mind. So this is our biological kind of response to seeing something like unfinished. And
Completion.
when we already see, when we already see that something is finished by half, we really want to connect it to the end. And using these kind of tricks, we can really inspire people to do key actions to discover the product. So it's not like we're asking them to do something not really profitable for them. We're just asking them to explore product in some ways of being challenged, and this opens up an opportunity to raise metrics of our own. And there's a lot of tricks like this. So basically, the start of every product is a little game for me, and I try to see it as a game.
Amazing. Thanks for that recommendation. That's very good. And especially as you were saying for onboarding, I think it's very useful to get people going, right?
Yeah.
So Alexander, or Sasha, if I may, as you mentioned before, when you're thinking, you're facing a new project, right? Something's coming in your door and you need to provide a solution, a design solution, which it can have game mechanics or not. Do you have some sort of process? Do you follow, I don't know, game thinking, design thinking, or like, how do you do it? Can you sort of guide us quickly through what those steps are?
I think I have process, but I haven't really found it, if it makes sense. I mean, I haven't formalized it in a way. I think there's a basic pillars that are important to me, like who are your users? What do you want them to do? Why this solution is better for them than any other? And then there is a set of personalized questions about the solution itself. I think I'm trying, whenever the new project comes, I try to be as specific and as personalized to the founder as possible, because this approach allows me to deliver the best results instead of building the same checklist for every product. Some products doesn't need checklists. Some product needs different marketing. Some projects needs different approach to development or design and so on. So I think my key questions are always about the final outcome for users, like what users should feel when they will accomplish something with your project. Because if they will pay for it for a really long time. And that's the goal in subscription business.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Just a quick break before we continue. Are you enjoying this podcast? If you're listening through a podcasting app, please subscribe and rate us on the app. This will be of great help to reach more engagers so we can change the world together through gamification. And Alexander, talking about these things, you mentioned, I think you've given many sort of top recommendations. Is there sort of a best practice, something that you say, well, when you do these things, when you're thinking of design, when you're thinking again of maybe of onboarding or whatever you want to go for, doing this thing, you mentioned checklist, it could be that, but doing this usually makes your project at least a little bit better.
The best recommendation for non-designers when you design something, if you don't have money for designer or you just want to make something yourself, is at every time and every screen, do not overwhelm your users and ask only for things that are required. Some time ago, I was working on Tickets UA. This is a startup from Ukraine, which basically sells bus tickets, train tickets, airline tickets. And one of the biggest problem in ticket industry is there are so many upsells and there are so many kind of options that you can choose that people are getting overwhelmed too quickly. So I was a lead in mobile design. So I was designing all of the mobile apps for this company. And one of the principles that I gave is like every time we ask people of something, we only have to give like one of two options, right? We don't have to overwhelm with many, many options. Every screen that is opening should ask only for one thing, not more. And this works fantastically on our revenues and amount of sales, because whenever people are facing really hard tasks or really just even generic tasks, you don't want people to sit down and solve complex puzzles. You want them to understand the goal of what they're doing and always remind them of the final outcome. And ideally, you would have like every screen would be, hey, do you want this? Yes or no? Hey, do you want this? Yes or no? Do you want like this seat? Yes or no? Do you want drinks? Yes or no? And it's better to make more steps that are really, really easy instead of overwhelming people on one screen with 50 decisions. And I see this all the time. No matter the complexity of the startup, founders usually tend to place as much of things on one screen and
the best use of your real estate on the screen. Right?
Yes, like every pixel is filled with text, with important context. But the fact is, people don't read. People don't read. People scan when they see the screen. People scan because this is more natural way of dealing with the information. So what you want to do is you want to have one large heading with a question and then two options that people have to choose from. This is the best layout, and in all successful products, you will see only this type of layout.
Amazing. Great recommendation, and applies to so many things for sure. So Alexander, when you've mentioned this is sort of a recommendation, and you've been hearing, sort of the vibe of the podcast, how do we flow? And perhaps somebody came to your mind, you say, well, talking about these things, and especially again, maybe perhaps in games, gamification, or even design, of course, I would like to listen to this other person, sort of discussing these things on the podcast. If you had a sort of recommended guest for the future, who would that be?
I think I have two of my past managers. One of them is Evgeny Plakhoy. This is a product manager of documents, and I think he has a fantastic mindset of analyzing the business as a system. And he's like really great businessman. Like as I would like, he was a really great mentor when I was working with him, and he really understands a lot about how the industry works. Because whenever you go to Twitter, there's so many recommendations, but he was able to filter the most essential ones and really show the improvements in sales and profits really quickly. I think there are several designers that I would love to recommend to you. I'll probably send you some people after.
Amazing. Sounds good. So keeping up with that sort of recommendations, is there a book that perhaps you would recommend, and why would you recommend such a book?
I wouldn't. I'm not really into books.
You can't read your way into design, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like the practice, maybe launching your own small startup and only dedicate the amount of time that you will read a book. So for example, 3, 4, 5 hours, but try to launch startup in one of the space. It would be better advice from me rather than read a book. But okay, let me just answer you with my favorite set of books. I think in childhood, my favorite author was Jules Verne, the guy who wrote about the islands and the trips and journeys in the sea. I think what I loved about it is how easy it was to imagine his books, how easy it was to get drawn into their worlds, and how fantastic description was like about how the people survived on the islands and how people survived in the sea. I really like the practicality there, and I feel like that imaginary worlds really are still living with me in some sense. And whenever I imagine some people using my product, I still imagine them in my head. I try to live their lives. So I think his books really inspired me, and I would recommend them to my children. So maybe I would recommend to your audience as well.
Amazing. And it's a spark to the imagination for sure. And talking about, things that other people do great, things that other books as well can do great. What would you say is in your case? What would you say is your superpower? That thing that you do at least better than most other people?
I think focusing on the most important thing in the room, on the screen, in the discussion is one of my main goals. I feel, if I may say so, I feel biologically painful when the room is focused on the wrong thing. Sometimes when imagine like 8 people talking about the future and they're trying to project things, I feel sometimes painful when the conversation goes not in the right way, and I kind of try to steer it back to the most important part. I think this is very design type thinking, kind of like, you always want to be minimalist. You always want to highlight the most important thing and desaturate everything else. And I think this is what I do best everywhere. And that's why kind of my onboardings really convert people into action. That's why my marketing campaigns are doing well. That's why whenever I speak with my reports, for example, in job, I try to highlight them and their achievements as brightly as possible.
Amazing. That's a great recommendation for sure to have for anybody, and a very good superpower to have if you're designing anything, essentially. And we are a podcast that has a lot to do with games and gamification. So we would like to know, Alexander, do you have a favorite game, and what would that game be?
Absolutely. I think it's quite popular answer right now, but one game that spoiled all other games for me because how good it is Zelda: The Breath of the Wild. It's just a fantastic in all of the points, all of the onboarding, a lot of graphics, a lot of dialogues, the stories, the challenges. It's such a well-made game that I downloaded maybe $1,000 worth of other games, and no one came near Zelda. And this is just painful for me because, I just can't play anything besides Zelda: Breath of the Wild.
There you go. And in a way, I think the whole Zelda saga in general, especially when it started, was like the epitome of the onboarding in a game, right?
Absolutely.
It's dangerous out there. Take the sword, right? And then you can do like whatever you want, right?
It's perfect.
You can do whatever. And
it's very smart.
Yeah. And there are things like you cannot go here, but it's not because, the game doesn't let you. It's, you can't go here because you have to. I remember, for example, the one in 64, like you were trying to get into a cave, but you didn't have an instrument to be able to get into that cave. So they didn't let you, right? And that instrument, of course, is not just for opening the cave. It serves all these other purposes. But it's an open world in a way, but then you also have, you kind of have to follow a certain, I don't want to say path, because it's not a path. I don't know, it's beautifully designed in that sense.
it's very, like, it opens a world in the way, like, I haven't felt this limitation. But after I was trying to play it in the hard mode the second time, and I remember that I've tried to decode some things, and I just saw how game is unintuitively and indirectly pushing me into the zones that I've already been kind of going in on the easy mode. So it's a fantastic example of being absolutely invisible kind of design, but the purpose is there. You are playing the game, not the design. And design is just so good that it's invisible. And that's the goal for many good designs, to stay as invisible as possible from the main purpose.
Amazing. Love that. So, Alexander, we're arriving towards the end of the interview. I don't know if you want to leave us with anywhere we can find more about you, about your work, what you do, any final piece of advice or any words that you have for the audience before we say it's game over.
Yeah, so I usually spend more time on Twitter right now. It's just a hell of communication, and I love it. I feel like I can learn so much good and bad stuff there. And I feel like this is like the Twitter DMs is my favorite feature because it allows me to walk through the dirty tweets and speak to a real person. You can also book my time on my site. I met probably 1,000 new people this year alone.
Oh, wow.
Just by kind of having these spontaneous calls. And it was an amazing experience. Yes, I think this is the main sources. Yeah.
Perfect. You will find that engagers all linked on our show notes. You'll find the Twitter, because if you're not from Ukraine, you're probably going to have a hard time spelling Vilinskyy. And same as with the page, the webpage, it's vilinskyy.com, right?
Yeah.
Vilinskyy.com. But you'll find it there. If you type Alexander on the search bar, you will find this episode, and you will definitely find this episode with all the links in the show notes. So, Alexander, once again, thank you very much for sharing your insights, your expertise, your experience, your design, not by reading, but by doing. However, at least for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Hey, Engagers, thank you for listening to the Professor Game podcast, and I hope you enjoyed this interview with Alexander, Sasha, however you want to call him. And of course, typically we are very curious, right? So there might be some questions you'd like answered by future guests. If you do, please go to professorgame.com/question and ask that question, because if selected, and I almost can promise you it'll be selected, we will answer it live in a future episode of the Professor Game podcast. Right on the podcast, it'll be there forever. And if you want your name mentioned, we can mention it as well. And of course, remember, before you go on to your next mission, before you click continue, remember, please, if you haven't done so, to subscribe or follow, whatever that looks like on your favorite podcast app, for free, and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.